Varrick is a capitalist. I think that is quite evident. But before we go further with that, it is important to really think about what we actually mean when we say that. Varrick is a symbol of capitalism in the same way that many of these shows' other villains are symbols of particular ideologies, emblems of these ideologies. And the show is constantly in a kind of discussion with these belief systems, all of which it finds somewhat wanting, but nonetheless it believes that something can be drawn from them. In fact, something must be drawn from them in order to attain a sense of coherence and stability in a fragmented modern world where the old certainties and old conceptions of permanence and tradition do not easily apply anymore. Varrick is a capitalist in the strict sense of being someone with a lot of money, a lot of capital that he puts into various idiosyncratic projects that deliver a return for him and increase his wealth. His first and foremost devotion is to his wealth, is to his greatly increasing supply of capital. Capitalism is a word that is thrown around a lot these days in ways I don't find particularly useful, but there is a commonality in what people think of when they think of capitalism, which is this devotion to profit and gain and productivity above all else. It is a system that sees the world primarily in terms of value, in terms of extracting as much worth from a current situation, a current enterprise, as can be expected. This is fundamentally what people think of as capitalism. It's not even as much a critique of a certain particular economic system as it is the critique of a mindset. The mindset of constant accumulation, of viewing the world in terms of maximizing productivity and profit, of viewing the world purely in economic terms. Minimize losses, maximize profits, and do everything in one's power to ensure that. And Varrick certainly falls under that image. He is someone who is not entirely without other concerns, but he is primarily devoted to as many enterprises that he can make money out of as possible. And he does not particularly care one way or another about the moral costs of that. There is a truly wonderful aspect of his character that is just brazen about this, such as in episode 205, I believe, of Korra, when Korra comes to Republic City, is rejected by Raiko, the bland careerist politician, and then goes to Varrick to participate in some of his nefarious schemes, which involve basically going behind the back of the president in order to loop the army into fighting a war against Unalak in the Southern Water Tribe, thus fulfilling Korra's desire and also allowing the shipment of Asami's future industry stuff to the war effort in the South. This is an idea that Korra is enthusiastic about because, being Korra, she is very passionate about what she believes is right at the moment, at the cost of perhaps not having a full, robust perspective on the world outside her own individual ambitions, and thus, through that insularity, causing damage to herself and others. This is a very morally specious plan, and Korra is arguably right for getting chewed out on this. Varrick, in proposing this to her, is like, well, if you can't make money during a war, you just can't make money. He is not just a war profiteer, he is unapologetic about this. And that is Varrick's character. He is based on a number of industrialists in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. These huge titanic figures that straddle multiple industries and genuinely enjoy business, enjoy the game of capitalism. Not simply because they want to be wealthy. If it was just that, they would stop, but because they genuinely enjoy and find valuable this process of investment, strategy, outcompeting the competition, and maximizing profits at all cost. Think of the likes of Rockefeller and Carnegie and J.P. Morgan. But above all, he is based on Howard Hughes, a very eccentric capitalist industrialist of the early 20th century. Like Hughes, Varrick is obsessed with aviation, arguably to a fault. He is also obsessed with movies and making them and becoming a mogul in an age when film was a much younger medium than it is now, and there was a lot of invention and experimentation to be had, just like in the aviation industry. And this speaks to this genuine inventor-engineer ethos, which is common among both Hughes and Varrick, which is not just a love of business, a love of the competition, the navigation of these industries, the securing of greater productivity and efficiency, but a sense of oneself as being a bold, daring adventurer on the cutting edge of technology. Both a figure very peculiar to a specific age, and also a figure that's still kind of with us nowadays. These rather wild Silicon Valley capitalists that we have nowadays in the 21st century are not so different. Hughes was extremely eccentric and eventually lost his mind. Varrick is just as eccentric, just as wild and unpredictable, but his story has a bit of a happier ending. Varrick is viewed ambivalently by the Legend of Korra. It's important to consider that he is ultimately right in Season 2. He commits a lot of terrible actions, from spreading rumors about the Northern Water Tribe being responsible for attacks that he himself staged, on the Southern Water Tribe Cultural Center and attacking his ships. He drums up all this in order to draw the Republic, the United Republic, into war, and ultimately embarks on a very grandiose scheme to kidnap the president, blame it on the North, and fundamentally force the Republic to go into war. He is a very sketchy character. At the same time, he's right, because the war effort in this scenario is noble and honorable. Unalaq is an imperialist invader, and, we learn later, allied with forces of pure evil that seek to destroy the world and bring on 10,000 years of darkness. Yes, Season 2 of Korra does get a bit over the top. Now, some would call this a confused portrayal. I don't think I would say that. I think it is intentionally two-sided. Varrick, in some instances, is correct, and he is a, it seems very sincerely, patriotic Southern Water Tribe person, starting all the way back at the beginning of the season, wherein Korra allows herself to be tricked by Unalaq and allies herself with the imperialist invaders. Again, Korra makes a lot of questionable decisions in Season 2, and she really grows from those decisions. Korra is, I would say, at her least sympathetic during this season, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. And Korra is very much a high-minded idealist. Varrick, however, is the exact opposite. He is quite cynical and devoted purely to profit, or almost entirely to profit. And yet, that puts him on the right side of things. As demonstrated by the end of Season 2, where Varrick is thrown in jail, but Team Avatar still needs his help after Raiko again refuses to help out, and he provides it to them. And he ultimately breaks out of jail when Unavatu attempts to destroy the city, and he ends up going to Suyin Beifong. And it is interesting to see the class dynamics on display throughout the season here. Korra is not always the best show at talking about class, but it is there. There's Mako and Bolin, both of whom are affected by this brush with Varrick, who seems to embody this ideal of the self-made man, the extremely wealthy capitalist industrialist who starts off with very little and becomes extremely successful. And while the show doesn't really dig into this, I would not doubt that he understands quite well the situations of Mako and Bolin, who were raised poor. Bolin, he ingratiates into his system, and he attempts to do the same to Mako, but Mako opposes him and is ultimately thrown in jail. And then Varrick uses those class dynamics against Mako. A big reason why Mako is thrown in prison by the detectives there is just simply class prejudice. Mako was a street rat. He was involved in some extent with these gangs. And because of that, people are more likely to believe that he was mixed up with them and that he was allying with them against the wealthy industrialist daughter, Asami. Varrick, I'm sure, knows how these dynamics work and deliberately uses them to his advantage. So he's an interesting figure. The Legend of Korra very much is in the footsteps of someone like Matthew Arnold, who believes that the monomaniac pursuit of profit and wealth is fundamentally narrowing. It's not for Arnold that these are terrible things in of themselves, but when they are fundamentally pursued only for their own sake, and not in relation to other desires for the well-being of oneself and one's fellow human beings and one's society and one's culture. This leads to this rather arid, very, very harsh, very narrow idea of life, where everything becomes about profit and productivity, where everything becomes about making as much money as possible, and all other aspects of life, the artistic, the cultural, the interpersonal, any connection to any other values and principles and ethoses is lost. This is a spirit that is still with us today, and it's one Matthew Arnold very much critiques. Arnold very much believes that there is no one sunum bonum, there is no one greatest good. Instead, there are a lot of other goods, a lot of various ideals and interests and preferences and ideologies that we ultimately should think about and consider and learn from in order to develop this broad-mindedness that a show like The Legend of Korra is very emphatically in support of. This does not necessarily equate to an attack on capitalism as such, an attack on the profit motive, an attack on the private pursuit of wealth and power. And indeed, while both the Avatar creators are certainly on the left, they were both Bernie Sanders supporters, they are not these very ardent revolutionary types. They simply, as this is demonstrated in the show, see that the pursuit of wealth, like any other ideology, can be very dogmatic and corrosive when it is pursued in a very narrow and shallow way. And I think this critique is done pretty well in Season 2. Varrick, for better or worse, is let off the hook a bit in Season 4, which decides to give him a redemption story. It's very interesting how he allies with the fascist Kuvira, an alliance which is, I think, quite a good reference to the alliance between the interests of wealth and capital and the hard power of fascist authoritarianism. How those two ideologies, though disparate, like capitalists might not be innately fascist or authoritarian, nonetheless can ally themselves with those kinds of people in order to protect their economic interests. And in fact, Kuvira needs Varrick and uses him quite effectively throughout the first half of the show. I think kind of giving Varrick this easy redemption arc is a bit too pat of a way of handling those complications, but nonetheless, this is an interesting character. Extremely charming, extremely charismatic, and yet, because of those things, because he's such a brilliant, wild inventor, it can be easy for one to overlook the malice and cold dogmatism that can lurk beneath that, this devotion to crush the competition and secure profits at all costs. But I think the show, certainly in its early seasons with Varrick, reveals both sides of his character quite well. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can. You want to see more videos like this one before anyone else. Keep watching Korra. It's a great show. I love watching it. I love exploring it. Adios, comrades.